Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to another instalment of Mills and Reeve's Halftime Equaliser series. Today in the hot seat, I have Kat Watson from Pitch International. Hi, Kat.
Hello, Phil. Nice to be here.
Good, great to have you on. Kat, absolute pleasure to have you here today. Really looking forward to hearing all about your route into sports law and the type of work that you do on a day-to-day basis. So to kick things off, do you want to tell us a little bit about your career to date, how you ended up as Director of Women's Sport at Pitch International?
Yeah, sure. I mean, firstly, I should say thank you very much for inviting me. It's very flattering. I'm not quite sure I can fill Lucy Bronze's boots, but here we go. So I guess we start when I did a law degree and I finished those 3 years hating law and lawyers, no offense. And so I did what all grown-ups do in that situation. I went traveling for a bit to work out what I was going to do with my life. And whilst I was in Australia, I ended up working in kind of events and conferences. So when I came back to London, that seemed like something fun to do. So I applied for lots of jobs in that space and ended up working at a commercial conference company. So they were just launching a legal team, so producing conferences for lawyers, and I ended up working on a portfolio of events that was for in-house lawyers or media lawyers, advertising lawyers, some sports lawyers, and did that for about 4 years and decided that actually quite a lot of the lawyers were all right and they weren't that strange and they were actually quite fun and the work they did was really interesting. So I went back and completed my legal training a bit late. Got a training contract that specialised in those kind of areas of law, and then moved in-house to an ad agency where I did a little, no one there was really interested in sport, which was great for me. So I did anything remotely sporty that came in. And then after a couple of years, I moved to a media agency, which was a bit more commercial, and there was an opportunity to do even more sports work. And then this opportunity at Pitch came up. So I joined the in-house legal team here, one of 3 lawyers when I joined. And about a year ago, so I've been here 4 years, about a year ago, they asked me if I wanted to take responsibility for all our women's sports activities, which I jumped at the opportunity to do. So here I am, part lawyer, part head of women's sports.
Brilliant. Quite a fascinating route into it and perhaps slightly unconventional, I suppose.
Yeah, well, my dad would always say she always gets where she needs to be, but she never takes the easy route. So I'll probably touch on that when you ask me the other questions.
Yeah, I think you've sort of fulfilled that statement as well. So, Kat, what does a typical day look like for you at Pitch?
Yeah, it's like the unanswerable question, isn't it? I don't think anyone has typical days anymore, but it's probably worth, maybe if I step back and explain a bit more what Pitch International does and then how my role fits into that. I think most people who are interested in sport will be very aware of the work Pitch does, but probably doesn't realise that it's Pitch that's behind the scenes making it happen. So now you're going to have to keep track because there's 7 areas that Pitch work across, and I'm always really paranoid I'm going to forget somebody, and one of my colleagues mortally offended if they ever listen to this. But the kind of bread and butter of what we do and what the business was founded on is media rights. So long-standing relationships with the Football League, the FA, Six Nations. And then over the years, they've diversified out into other sectors within sport. So we've got a strong, I'm literally counting them on my fingers so I don't miss anyone. We've got
Safest way.
yeah, a sponsorship sales team. So a lot of what they do is football front of shirt deals. They did the Saracens deal that replaced Allianz. So City Index, stadium naming and the shirts for the men's and women's teams. We've got a production team. So, well, there's 2 types of production. So we've got the live production and technical distribution. So they are the ones responsible for actually putting the live TV presentation together and making sure via satellites and loads of stuff that I don't really understand, it reaches people on the screen. And then what other people might think is a kind of more traditional production team that is one of the world leading sports documentary producers now. So they're responsible for All or Nothing with the Brazil national team, which was on Amazon. Pele documentary that was on Netflix, the Andy Murray documentary that was on Amazon, make sure I get them all the right way around, and plenty of other stuff in the pipeline. And then how many have I got up to? 4, 5? You're not How are you not helping me? We've got an advisory and consultancy part of the business, so they'll advise across private equity, which is obviously an increasing area from a private equity or a rights holder perspective, calendar structure or media rights strategy, and then pitch representation, which is our athlete representation business. And I think they've got about 80-ish athletes that they represent across football, rugby, cricket, and motorsport. I think I've hit 7.
I think you have, yeah. Very, very in depth as well. So certainly, yeah, a typical day can sort of take many forms, I suspect, and there's no one size fits all.
No, there's not, especially not when I'm doing both these roles. So I'm fundamentally a commercial contracts lawyer. So obviously everything we've spoken about involves contracts. So whether that's a rights agreement or sponsorship heads of terms, option agreements on talent for their life rights for a film, and then all the regulatory stuff, which I really enjoy because that's how we met. And then on the women's sports side, I guess that can be working on some of the same projects, but from a more commercial aspect. So looking at media rights acquisitions from a more commercial perspective. At the moment, we're working on a big new women's football tournament, which will launch next year. So on that, at the moment, can be all sorts of things. So talking to federations about getting top teams involved, working with a title sponsor, working on how we're going to announce and make sure we get in touch with the media that's got the best contacts within women's sports, and all the way down to looking at branding and what the look and feel of the event is, which probably isn't my strong suit.
Yeah, so no one size fits all then.
No, and also we like to be out and about and talking to clients and going to the pub, and there's time for that.
Yeah, that's the more fun part of the job, perhaps. So staying on your sort of unconventional route into what you do now, Kat, what would you say is the most important thing you've learned in your career to date? And any aspect of your career, at the start, the middle, last week, who knows?
I think, one of the things I'd say is that you should kind of pick a path, and this is probably why I've ended up doing a bit of an unusual route to get to where I am, but I think pick a path that you think is interesting, and then come to work. Hopefully, you can work really hard, but it doesn't feel like such hard work because you enjoy what you're doing and you find it interesting. I think I probably learned that quite early on when I got into a bit of a row with my parents about picking my A-level choices. So the school I went to didn't have a sixth form, and so all my friends just went to a sixth form college. It's the normal thing to do. And my parents were quite against that, thought I wouldn't do any work, probably fairly, and wanted me to quite a strict, structured sixth form school, which obviously I wasn't that keen on. So the way I got around it was I said, okay, well, I must study law, psychology and business studies as A-levels. Particularly at the time, my parents were like, they are not proper A-levels, which I obviously contest, and it's not done me any harm, but got my way based on saying that I really, really wanted to study those subjects, and this was the only way I could do it. And I ended up loving it and having a nice time. And then because I'd been a bit stubborn about it, obviously had to work really hard to make sure I still got the grades and prove my mum and dad wrong. So I think that's probably something that I'm still doing now. As I say, not necessarily picking the easy path, but always trying to mix having fun, which we certainly do at Pitch, with working hard.
Yeah, I think I did similar A-levels to you, Kat, so I'd been backing you up in that argument.
Okay, good. I'm offended you.
So on that sort of period of your life then, if you could talk to your, I don't know, let's say 16-year-old self, what's the one thing you'd advise them about life or career? If you could look back now at where you are now and where you were back then.
I must have been about 16 when I was having those fights with mum and dad, so
yeah.
Back yourself, you'll be fine. You're just going to have to work harder to make sure you don't let anyone down. But I think probably slightly connected, but I'd say that things don't always go to plan, which again is probably what's led to me having a bit of a windy career path. And even if you have worked really, really hard and you think it's horribly unfair, it's okay. And you'll figure it out and just pick a different route.
Yeah.
I think that's probably happened a few times over my career when I haven't got what I assumed was going to happen next, but just have to pivot, take a different route.
Yeah, stick with it, I guess, and back yourself, I think, is the the key takeaway there. I think we've all been in that situation at some point. I think working in sport, especially as a lawyer, is probably the dream for most law students if you ask them, but transitioning into that is another story, and there's a lot of hard work that goes behind it, whether in-house, private practice, whatever. So glad to see we've had similar struggles. Talking about sort of women's sport more generally, Kat, what are some of the key issues that women who work in sport are dealing with at the moment that you're seeing, or that you can identify?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because there's lots of talk, there's lots of women's sports groups, and lots of kind of quite disappointing chat, really, given that it's 2021 and lots of people feeling like they've been held back. I personally, as I say, it's disappointing that is still happening to people. That's, I've come a bit of a stranger around, but I certainly don't feel like I've been held back at any point because I'm female. And like you've just said, sometimes you just have to check yourself and say, you're a sports lawyer, and yeah, life's hard, all jobs is hard. We wouldn't like it, otherwise it'd be boring, wouldn't it? But sometimes you just have to check yourself and realize that I've got a job that I actually really love, and if you said to me 5 or 10 years ago, you're going to be a sports lawyer and you're going to be head of women's sports, I'd say it's utterly ridiculous, because having one of those jobs is hard enough to get, but having them, I obviously feel very fortunate. I think, if you do get to a relatively senior position in the sports industry at the moment, one thing I speak to some of my friends in the industry about quite recently, actually, is that, even though you can be surrounded by genuinely supportive colleagues that fully get how exciting women's sports is and are willing to invest, which is where I am at pitch, it's sometimes quite tricky if you are the only woman in a room, and you obviously naturally look at the world through a different lens to men, and that's not anybody's fault. That's just kind of a symptom of the environment in which you've grown up. And so sometimes it can be quite daunting thinking I'm the only one that's got this viewpoint in the room. And not to say I'm always the only woman in the room. I'm certainly not. There's loads of brilliant female clients and loads of other brilliant women that work here. But obviously, inevitably, that happens. And I think, you need to have a look and think, well, why am I even in this room? Part of the reason you're there is probably because you do have an interesting and different perspective to bring to the group. So you don't want to sit there and keep it to yourself, because you're kind of wasting your USP in a way. As I say, I just think you've got to kind of say what you need to say, and again, come back to the same thing, back yourself.
Completely agree. I think strides have been made, but there's a hell of a lot more to do. Sticking with that, Kat, how do you see women's sport evolving over the next sort of five years or so? Obviously, in football, for example, women's sport, it's come on massively, not just domestically, but across the world, and other sports as well. I think we saw at the Olympics, there was a huge amount of representation of women's sports, such as football, again, is the obvious example, but it's come on leaps and bounds, certainly in the last 10 years. So do you feel we're at the stage now where the next 5 years is pivotal? Do you see exponential growth? Obviously, in your role as director of women's sport, you'd hope so, but realistically, where do you think this is going to go?
It's an exciting time, isn't it? There's lots of talk about it, and I don't think it is just talk. I do think it's real. I think the pace of change is rapid, and there's loads of things that we can talk about that might happen in the next, you said 5 years, didn't you? 5 years feels like a long time, but equally it's not that long a time, because I know with the WSL, for example, had some brilliant publicity around their new domestic media rights deal, which is fantastic for football and for women's sports generally. But you also have to remember that that's been 10 years in the making. That hasn't happened overnight. There's been a lot of work that's gone into building the WSL into the product it is now. And I think that will continue. I think sponsorship and broadcast revenues will absolutely continue to grow. And I think what's really important there is where that revenue gets reinvested within those properties. And also private equity, as we all know, is circulating not just women's sports, but lots of sports properties at the moment. So once either that organic growth or that new investment comes in, the key thing will be how's that invested. So in my view, and people have different views on this, although it's sexy and exciting to say we've got massive equal prize pot for the women's competitions we have ends, is that actually sustainable, and is that helping the sport develop? Whereas again, using the WSL and as an example, as you know, they're a client and we know them well, but they've been very open about the fact that some of that media revenue is going to go back into investing in referees. And again, critical for the quality of that product to keep improving. And again, like the money needs to go into the infrastructure. So whether that's referees or coaches or the commercial team behind the scenes, I just think that's really important. And then, you know, there'll be more brands that are increasingly putting football or women's sports into their sponsorship strategies. That will hopefully there'll be more properties for people to invest in, but more brands looking at a certain limited pot of properties only drives revenues up. Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. It's an accessibility point as well. As you say, you talk about the WSL broadcasting deal and those sorts of things. It's having that accessibility to see women's sport grow, which attracts the audience and in turn sort of builds the profit of the industry, I suppose.
Yeah, and you know, with us, we are involved in the international media rights sales for the WSL, and that can be a slower process in some markets because WSL's got massive international footprint now. There are some markets where culturally women's sport is perhaps not supported as well as it is here in the States or Australia. And that might not, it may change in 5 years, it might not. You know, that's to say it's a long burn cultural change. But as they see other markets progressing, then you would hope that the appetite picks up, and that's certainly what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think the key takeaways we're definitely going in the right direction, aren't we?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and there's loads of exciting things going on. I mean, you mentioned the Olympics and all the mixed races, and I can actually see above your head, we've got the 100 on here, which again is a brilliant example.
Yeah.
Packaging men's and women's sport together, and through that, the women's sport's obviously reaching a new audience, which is brilliant.
Yeah, definitely exciting times at the moment. Final long question for you, Kat. I could stay here all day and talk to you about women's sport, the development, but conscious don't want to take up too much of your time. More of a personal question, I suspect. What's the sort of biggest challenge you've faced in your career to date?
Yeah, I'm glad you gave me a heads up about this one because it's probably not one I'd be able to answer off the cuff. And I think it's probably when I didn't get the NQ, the newly qualified job that I thought I would when I qualified. And to be honest, it's not something that I really talk about very much when I was reflecting on it earlier. So here we are, breaking news. I do have emotions. And I think there's a real stigma attached to it. You'll know, you've been through the process, and I'm sure watching this are lawyers as well. And I think it was I always knew that I wanted to be in-house eventually, but in my head, I was going to do my training contract, get a job in the commercial team, and then work there for, I don't know, 3-4 years or until a great opportunity came up, and then move on. And that didn't happen. It was one of those, you know, those processes are awful. You get picked against your friends, and you have to the whole thing's awful. And I, you know, I've been led to believe that I had that job in the bag, but I didn't, clearly. And look, one of my best friends got it, and she's an exceptional lawyer and now has a really sexy job at Burberry. So absolutely, she deserved that job. I just naively thought, oh, they'll obviously make room for both of us, but they didn't. So I guess I saw it written down actually on one of those Instagram memes, whatever it was, some kind of self-help thing. And it said rejection equals redirection. Yeah. Yes, that's probably the lesson from that, is that obviously I was mightily disappointed at the time. And I thought, oh my God, what a waste of time. I've become a lawyer and haven't got what I thought I was going to get. But it turned out fine. I ended up here, and you know, who knows, that might not have happened if it had gone.
Yeah, I think that's a resilience point, isn't it, Kat? I think.
Yeah.
Turning up to your current role, whereas you could have packed it all up and moved elsewhere. So testament to you. Well, definitely.
As we discussed, it was already quite far into my career, so I'd already given up a paying job to go back to law school, so I had to pack it up at that point.
Right, Kat, that's been a great insight, and I'm sure all the viewers on this will find that massively interesting to hear your development, hear about pitch, where that's going, and your views as someone who operates within women's sport 24/7 as to where you think it's all going to go and what the challenges are. So massively appreciate you giving us the lowdown and the insight into that. Before we finish though, Kat, I want to hit you with a couple of quick fire questions. So no chance to prepare for these. These are going to be off the cuff, and they normally say your first answer is the true answer. It's when you start thinking about stuff that you question yourself. So yeah, let's see where we get to.
Okay.
So the first one, sun or snow?
Easy, sun.
Okay. Horror or rom-com?
Rom-com.
Now, next one, wine or beer?
I don't know why you're laughing. Is it because you know that I don't mind either?
We've drank both before, Kat, together, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say not at the same time, but probably wine, if I have to.
Okay. This one's a bit more difficult. Favorite city in the world?
That's hard. Okay. I'd say when the sun's out, probably London.
Wow. Okay.
When the sun's out.
Only when the sun's out.
Yeah, so like once every 3 years.
Yeah. Okay.
After that, Sydney.
Sydney. Okay. Okay. Other side of the world. The song that gets you on the dance floor when there's no COVID restrictions and everything else, which there isn't now. So at the time of shooting this video, you can go on a dance floor to a song, I believe.
Something awful and cheesy. God, I've got a mind blank now. It'd be something terribly embarrassing, like with Whitney Houston or or something.
Okay, that's not embarrassing. I think that's a good choice. And then final question, before we sort of wrap things up, who is going to win the Premier League this year?
Leicester City.
Okay, I won't ask you who you support, Kat.
I don't really support anybody. I was born in Leicester. I was lucky enough to be at Wembley to watch them win.
Yeah.
Quite recently, so they're on a high.
Yeah, well, they've already got one piece of silverware, so yeah, onwards and upwards. Certainly going to be up there, I think. Good stuff. Kat, again, absolutely brilliant to have you on. Really, really appreciate it. Can't wait to get this out to all the viewers and the followers on our Instagram page and see their comments and if there's any questions that come for you off the back of it. But just such a massive thank you from me and the team for speaking to me today. And yeah, hopefully we can catch up in person soon.
It's a pleasure. Always around the pubs of Southwest London if anybody wants to catch up in person.
I'm sure people will take you up on that, Kat. Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Kat.
Lovely. Thanks, Phil.